And then at the end, there will be a little bit of time for questions if anything comes up. And again, because it's being recorded, if you miss anything or want more information, that will be available. Starting out, this is my contact info. Will be several times in the presentation. Quite serious here. If you have any questions after the presentation or you run into any problems with this, trying to replicate what we did here, feel free to drop me an email. I do respond to them. So let me get the slide to actually work here.
Hello?
Hi, we're having one little problem with muting. Lester will be muting everybody other than me in just a moment. The slides are going a little quirky there. First I've used this laptop for a webcast, so I apologize for that. Just a little bit of background on me. I've been with Advanced DataTools for about 10 years. I've been working with PHP for at least 8 of those and was a avid Perl user both before that and still to this day. I've also been toying with most of the other major open source languages at one point or another. My day-to-day job really varies. I have several different clients I support, but most of my clients right now, I am actually supporting several different PHP applications across multiple clients. And then I do traditional DBA support, Unix administration. I tend to wear many hats, but it really comes back for me back to the web development and just sometimes straight scripting. And probably 70% of my job at this point is PHP work. See if it is going to change slides on us here. Okay. I'm not sure why the change slide isn't working, but at any rate, just a real quick introduction to PHP. If you're not familiar with it, it stands for PHP Hypertext Preprocessor. The open source community loves recursive acronyms. Starter out is a set of Perl scripts, so for those of you that come from the Perl world, this won't look too different for you. And what it really did is, as it grew up, I entered some of the timeline pieces here, it really started out and has continued to be focused on a web-based language. There's a lot of open source scripting languages out there. This really is the premier one for doing web-based work. So that's really where it's focused, but it is not exclusively there. It also works quite well from the command line, and on many applications, you'll see a mix of the two. If you've ever worked with something like WordPress, you ever worked with gone onto Wikipedia, Facebook, it's a major part of the web these days. Not sure why it keeps flipping it, missing the slides. We're only going to hit a few more here. The real advantage to it is it's fast to develop. You can go from zero to having something functional in a very short amount of time. It's flexible in its coding styles. This is a plus or minus depending on your environment, but there's many ways of properly coding PHP, and many different styles, many different ways to do it. It's why going by a framework or having internal standards is important. It's incredibly widely supported. It'll run on just about any Linux system, on Windows, on Mac. It's very easy to get up and running on almost anything. It's free, including commercial use, no licenses, no extra pieces you need. You pair it with Apache, you can go enterprise level with no upfront costs in terms of software. Of course, there's man hours involved. And the big part is it performs exceedingly well as long as it is well written. It ties into your web server as a module, so it will just go through and run with the same performance your web server does. So you don't need to have a whole nother service that's running and being managed separately. You can tie it directly in. See if I can get. Something with WebEx is preventing me from changing slides. So it'll run on just about any web server, Apache, IIS, WebSphere, iPlanet if you're still running that. You can run it directly against CGI, so just about anything short of a toaster it will run with. So for most Linux systems, you will find it as part of the standard package repositories, so you should be able to pretty much one command install PHP. Windows, there's a nice handy installer. You just run an executable and it goes through and installs everything for you. It'll compile with really not a whole lot of effort on just about any Unix system. You can compile it on Windows. It is not the easiest thing to do. Configure, if you need to compile it from source, which really you don't need to nearly as often these days, there's a huge amount of configuration tweaks you can make if you need a really customized setting. But 98% of the time, the standard installers and the standard package management tools will have everything you need. Just going to touch a couple of real quick pieces on it. For those of you coming from the Perl environment and you're used to the Perl package management system, PHP has a similar one called PECL. This is where our database drivers live. It's part of the PECL system. So if you need to have a third-party module brought in or created, oftentimes you'll do it as one of these, and that way it builds directly into the PHP system fairly cleanly. Some things can be installed with one click. The Informix driver is a little trickier, which is why we have this webcast. Just really quickly showing you what a PHP file looks like. Starts out, let's see if I get the full screen on. Starts out with just less than question mark or less than question mark PHP. You have your code, and then you tell it the end of the code. You can embed this directly in HTML, so some people like to do it so you have everything inside of little bits of HTML. Some people do it that way. Some people have these entirely standalone scripts. As I said, it's a very flexible system. But that right there is the also thing with the hello world is a perfectly valid web file that you could put on a server running PHP and it would run right now. So getting into what PDO is, because really what this talk is all about is the database layer. There's plenty of information out there on how to get PHP running, how to code PHP. We are actually going to be having some more articles coming out about actually writing good PHP code against databases. But this talk is specifically about getting the driver up and running and getting the first couple of scripts running against it. So if you have used PHP years ago, and I know a number of Informix folks that had a very bad taste left in their mouths. There originally was a standalone Informix driver for it. This was written back in the Informix 7.3 days. It was never terribly stable. It was never completely done. This was something that a couple of Informix enthusiasts put together but never really finished and then was never officially supported. So a number of people used PHP, tried to get something up and running to varying levels of success, and then often went on to other products or other languages such as using Perl with the very nice Informix module for that, and never came back. Now I'm telling you, if that is your experience, it's time to come back. What PHP did with the version 5 release about 6 years ago now, they introduced PDO. This is the Portable Database Object System, where it standardized their database drivers. If you've ever had to maintain PHP code that someone else wrote, especially if it's something that's a third-party system, you'll often find all kinds of wacky, often MySQL code using their own set of MySQL drivers, or their set of Oracle drivers, or their set of each one having its own syntax, each one having its own formats, its own set of bugs that you had to work around. It was quite the mess. PDO, what they did is they decided to have all of our drivers work the same way. So for each of the different database, and have it be a pluggable format, so you can just plug a new database driver into the system. So this works a little bit like ODBC if you've worked with that before, where all the drivers should work about the same. They're all controlled the same way, and the code should be pretty much compatible between all of them. It was an open source methodology, so they put it out there so anybody can write a driver if they want to. And IBM went ahead and wrote two. Actually, I think they have more than that, but they have two that they're currently working on. The first one is the PDO Informix driver. This is specifically for the Informix environment. This is for version 7 and later. I actually know somebody that got this running against Informix SE. It'll run it's the old Informix connection libraries. We'll work against all of them, and we'll support pretty much everything in Informix. The second one is the PDO IBM driver. This is using the new DRDA protocol. So this will actually work against basically any of the IBM databases. You can use the exact same driver on Informix, DB2, as well as several of the other databases in the IBM library. I don't know if it extends to all of them or not yet, but I know they were working that direction. But it's trying to get a unified database library for all of this. The plus side is because of that, they are actively working on it. The downside is because it's a unified driver. They haven't actually put in support for all of the Informix custom data types yet. There are some aspects, and I don't have a proper list of what is supported and what isn't. I know at one point UDRs were not entirely supported. Some of the custom data types aren't. And this is something as they work on the DRDA protocol, more will be supported, but right now it's not everything. However, you'll find some people saying the IBM one is going to be the wave of the future, but for right now, most everybody is focused on the PDO Informix driver, and that's what we're going to be dealing with today. The other piece of the PDO Informix driver that is why it is at least the default for right now is the fact that OAT runs on it. If you have an OAT install anywhere on your in network or in your environment, it means you are currently already running Apache with PHP running the PDO Informix driver to connect. So you already have it there, you already have it in your environment, so it's not any big leap. The other nice thing because of that is anytime that the OAT team needs some new feature put in or something tweaked or something fixed, they can go and just request it, and then it gets rolled into the larger open source driver. The latest version was just released back about a month ago, so they are actively developing it. The other nice thing the PDO abstraction layer actually adds is it handles errors fairly nicely. Prior versions, you were a little bit hit or miss on being able to trap errors, so the new system handles it quite well. So there are two ways now you have your PDO driver you want to get installed. There's two ways to install it. One of which is you can compile it into PHP itself. This way everything is built in cleanly and it is tied in and everything is tied in. Back when it was first released, this was the easier way to do it. It tended to compile a little cleaner. I had some problems trying to run it as a module. However, that was then and this is now. Now on every environment I work on, I install the PDO Informix driver as a separate extension. I do this so I can upgrade it as I need it, and more importantly because quite often I am working in an environment where I work and compile in a development environment, but I run in production. So I can compile it in development and just copy over the single file I need, which is just one shared object, and plug it into production without needing to compile anything there. Tends to make life a little easier. I haven't had any compiling problems since then on any of the environments I've worked with in the past several years. So I'm going to skip over compiling it directly into PHP because I really feel that is outdated, but the slide is here if you want it. You can install directly through PECL using PECL install PDO Informix. I have found, however, this works on very few systems. Most you will run into problems on, and it will fail during the install. So we're going to go through manually building the module. So to swap over here, I'm going to swap my window. Going to go over into a putty screen. This is running on OpenSUSE. This will also, the instructions I'm going to give you here will also work fine on SUSE Enterprise. It should be very similar to Red Hat or any other Linux you want. I specifically chose SUSE because there is two problems with it that I wish to address. That I don't want people running into and having problems with in their production environment. Plus, I am just a fan of SUSE and I do run it in production, so I have had to do these exact same steps. So what I did here is I downloaded the PDO Informix RGZ file. There's a link at the end of the slides to where you download this, or you can always just Google it. It'll pretty much be the first link. Again, this is open source, freely available. You just go download it, and all it is the source code. I apologize, I am... I'm going out of K-shell because I think something there. I normally work in Bash. I was told earlier that the colors in Bash were causing a problem, so switched to K-shell. That apparently is causing its own set of problems. The fun of live demos, of course. So there it properly comes up. Clear the window here. And showing you what's in this directory is you'll notice they are not your standard build tools. You're not, all you have is a makefile fragment. What this is the files that are needed to create the buildable environment. If you download any of the PECL modules directly, they will all look like this. You'll notice there's no configuration tool, there's none of the standard tools. What we're going to do is run a tool called PHP IZE. This will actually go through all these pieces they have here and get them go through, look at your PHP environment, and prepare and generate the files as needed to actually build the module. So you go through, the warnings are just warnings. They will continue to work fine. It gives you your information about what PHP version and the module system you're going to have. The second thing to do is to set your Informix directory. And what you have now, if you look in the directory, this should look much more familiar for anyone from the Unix world. This is your standard, directory ready to be built. And so all you have to do is run configure. On some environments, this will configure fine. We are going to run into an error here, and I will show you how to handle it. This is where this install gets a little tricky. I have a bug request in with IBM to fix this, but it has not been put in yet. So it starts running through the configuration, and what you will get if your environment is on a SUSE, and I'm not sure, I've not gone through and tested the latest module for all the other distributions out there, but what you'll find is checking for PHP includes configure error, cannot find PHP PDO driver.h. If you run into this error, here's how you fix it. You open up your configure file, and I've already pulled it up here. It is line 4677. What I always do is just do a string search for the PHP PDO driver.h. There's only one section that it's listed in. And what you see that they've done is have a series of tests looking for what the PHP directory is in. The problem is they hard-coded these, and SUSE uses a different directory. So what you want to do in this case, there's plenty of ways to modify this. I normally just add in a new rule. So what I'm actually going to do is add in the location for SUSE where they put it. The big difference for SUSE is they put everything in PHP directories called PHP 5. All of the scripts here assume it's going to be on /PHP. So all we have to do is tell it to look for the PDO driver in the user include PHP 5 directory. Just follow the format they already have there. That is the only part you need to add in here, just to test to see if it's 2 lines. The first one, test to see if this file exists. And then if so, that's what you define your PDO include path to. Your change will either work or won't. If it doesn't work, you'll see the same error. If it does work, you'll get passed. So I'm actually going to configure again. See how it went through cleanly. It's finished the lib tool. I then can build it, this is very quick. Yeah, that took all of 4 seconds on a VMware running on a laptop. And then what you do is you should be able to do a make test. However, on SUSE, this won't work. SUSE splits out, the way they do their PHP install makes it far easier to manage your PHP environment because it actually splits out the web module from the command line module. However, it breaks the make test on this. I don't have a proper workaround for this yet. However, with this driver, it is either it runs or it doesn't. So as long as your PHP tests fine and you can connect to your database, you will be in good shape. So all you have to do, you make install, and it's going to install your file. You'll see the directory out here where it is putting the file to. All it's doing is copying it and setting permissions. So user lib64 PHP 5 extension, and it will create a file in that directory called PDO_informix.so. So at this point, we now have the PDO Informix module installed on the system. What are we going to do with it at this point? Because PHP doesn't know it's there yet. It does not automatically look at modules. You have to manually enable it. So PHP has this command line version, and if you run it with the -m switch, you'll get a list of modules on the system, core, C-type, date. You may have a few of them, you may have 40 of them, actually there's more than that available. It all depends on your environment. You'll notice there's a PDO here and a PDO ODBC and the PDO SQLite. There's obviously not the Informix. But that's how we know Informix is not already on the system. All we have to do to enable it is add a one-line command to the PHP configuration file, which is, on some systems, you'll have a single file called php.ini. I will show in a moment how to get to that. On other systems, you will have to actually have multiple files. Again, I like how SUSE did it. It's easier to manage when they split it, but you have to just be aware of that. On SUSE, what they did is they created the install. So there's 2 different directories. There's PHP 5 and there's CLI, conf, and Apache 2. Apache 2 is your web configuration, CLI is your command line configuration, and conf.d is global configurations. In the confd directory, there is a separate, it just reads through every INI file in there. You see your PDO, you see your PDO ODBC. So if you can't remember the exact formatting of the line you need to add, just look at any of the existing ones. You'll see it really quickly. So what we're going to do is create a new PDO Informix.ini file in that directory. And it only needs one line. Extension, PDO, PDO_Informix.so. If you're on Windows, it'll be PDO_Informix.dll. That's all you need to have. And if you're on PHP-M again, you now see we have PDO Informix as one of the modules installed on the system. All you have to do now for the web server piece is to bounce the web server. Again, this is entirely environment specific. On this system, I'm using initd scripts. And now Apache is restarted, and as it restarts, it does a refresh of the PHP module, so now it'll recognize the Informix module is there. That is all it takes to actually get PDHP running against Informix with PDO. It can take a little bit the first time you set it up. After that, it's very quick. Again, I did it here, nothing under my sleeves. Here in all of 15 minutes while talking to you. In a production environment, you can usually have it running in under 5. Also for reference here, this was a brand new VMware image I put together this morning. It took, after the system was on a clean install, it took all of 6 minutes, I believe it was, to have it automatically install and configure PHP and Apache. So grand total of 15 minutes of time to have a fully functioning web server ready to go, able to connect to your database. So to actually discuss the code a little bit here, I created a couple of samples. The first one is our database connection file. I'm going to pull up here. This is how I normally do it is I have a separate file I always include in everything else that'll actually connect to the database, so I can always keep those settings the same. And if I'm deploying across multiple instances, I know just not to deploy that file because each one will have their own connection properties. This one, and I apologize for the word wrap on it, is very, very straightforward. You can get much more flexible with how to do this. But at the top, we start out our script, then set the 5 environment variables we care about right now. What I do here, the next line, is put environment, the Informix dir. This is because I don't always trust that the web user, the website user has Informix dir set, so I force it in the script. You certainly can set it up in your web server start scripts to define Informix dir, or if you're on Windows, it's usually part of the global profile anyway. I just include this line just out of habit, just in case. How the actual connection happens is the next line here. This one line here is what connects us to the database. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a new variable, DBH, database handle, and we're going to set it to a new PDO object. So it's a new database driver object. And it's going to, the first thing we're going to include here is and I apologize for the cursor, trying to get out of the way here, is the database type. So in our case, obviously, Informix. If you're using this against another environment, you're using this against the PDO DB2 or IBM driver, you put IBM here. If you're doing against ODBC, you have the ODBC here. Then you have colon, and then you have your connection string. Each of the items in the connection string are separated by semicolons. All of this is one big text string, if you note. So we have our host equals host name, semicolon, service, and this is your service port. I hard code the service port. You can, of course, have it defined in SC services. Database equals database name, server, Informix server. Yeah, this is your Informix server value. Your protocol you're connecting with. If you have any other connection string pieces you wish to add onto the line, you can just have them semicolon separated. So if you'd want something like enable scroll cursors, if you wanted to have change the fetch buff size, any number of other variables you might want to set, you can do here. So that's all one big string. One big note here with PHP is normally you can have line breaks in strings. This one in particular, you cannot. If you have a new line anywhere in the string, it will actually return, or it will not connect properly. The second and third variables are the login and password. If you leave these blank, it'll use whatever the current login is. So if you have a read-only database, you can give it grant, connect, and read or select permission to the website user, and you never need to have a password listed. So at this point, this single line is all you need to connect to the database. The next one I include here, because I use this on almost every time I will connect, is the database handle is an object. And as an object, I can run functions directly against it of that object type, which is PDO. The PDO section of the website, and I'll talk about them more in a moment, has a lot of different options you can set here. The first one I almost always do is I set the attribute, so it's setting a database attribute for the connection handle. And I tell it the PDO ATTR case, which is a defined string for, or defined value for it. And I'm telling it case lower, which is the second thing. The first parameter is what variable I'm setting on the connection handle. The second one is what value I'm setting it to. What this is doing with the setting the attribute case is when I return data from a select statement, by default it goes to, normally and on most environments I've been on, it defaults everything to uppercase. So unless you want to hard code anytime you're using an associated array or an object, hard coding all the field names entirely as uppercase in your code, you set this so that way they will be standard lowercase, which most people are more comfortable with. You also, in the same way, if you like uppercase, you can actually set case underscore upper, and it'll set all of them always to uppercase, so you always know how the language will handle, or how the data will return, depending on your environment. One piece to note with PHP, if you're not familiar with it, all variables are case sensitive. So a variable named entirely in uppercase and a variable entirely named lowercase, or even a mixed case, every one of those will be different, so this does matter. So we have our database connection handle here. So what this does is this particular script, the moment it is included on into an application or included into a page that's about to be run, it runs through this top to bottom the moment it is included. So in this case, if we run it by itself, and all you have to do to run same command line is just run PHP and then the file, we're going to have nothing come back. That's a good thing. If there was an error, and I'm going to introduce one here intentionally, I'm going to set the password wrong, drop a character. You'll actually see a PHP fatal error get thrown here. Uncaught exception. This isn't very pretty. There are plenty of ways to trap and handle errors, but specifically you see your Informix ODBC error, incorrect password or user unknown. So if it errors out when you're trying to connect, it'll tell you right off the bat. So to actually show you how to now use the database handle, to actually use it for something, I have a couple of other handy scripts here. The first one is a standard select statement, and I'm going against the stores demo database, so everyone should have a copy of that available in some development environment, or if not, you certainly can install it using DB Access Demo. All of these scripts should be available on the website around the same time the webcast will be put up. So we start a script, and these are intentionally very, very simple. I don't go into all the error trapping. I try to keep stuff as clean as possible. So all we have here is the first line. It includes the db.php. So the first thing this application will do will go out and connect to the database. The next thing is I take the variable SQL line and gave it this string and set it as this string, select custom fname, lname, city from customer, where the customer number is 103. I just chose it at random. There's no particular significance to that 103. I created a statement handle and set it to take the database object, the database handle object, and then prepare the statement as the SQL line variable. So I take SQL line, I prepare that against your database handle, and then set it to the STH variable. So now STH is a pointer to that prepared statement on the database. The next thing is I tell that statement handle to execute. Again, we're not passing anything to it, so it's just going to execute as is. Then I go back and I'm only going to return one value on this. You certainly can do this in a while statement. There's lots of different ways to fetch the data. But what we're going to do is we're going to take our statement handle. We're going to fetch the data. If you leave that with no arguments, it'll fetch back in both a numerical and an associated array. In our case, we're actually going to tell it using the PDO fetch object variable, or as defined string. It's going to fetch it back as an object, and we're going to fetch it back to the variable row. So now row is an object of the type, the fetch statement. And then we're just going to print out customer, and then row and the variable customer number, row variable F name, row variable L name, and then the row and the city. So each one of these tells the element customer number on the variable row, element F name on variable row, etc. And then we're just going to close the cursor. So again, nothing up my sleeve. Goes out 103 Philip Curie in Palo Alto. You'll notice the extra spacing there. I didn't do anything to trim out the white space. These are defined as characters, so they are returned with the white space intact. You certainly could use the trim function either in the SQL line, or there's a trim function in PHP that works the same way that you could wrap this in. There's lots of different ways to do your formatting, your output, however you want. And to show a demonstration here very quickly, and I'm hoping this will work the way I'm expecting it to. I'm switching over to my WebEx is giving me a little bit of trouble sharing this application. So just pulled it up on the same web server. I have a web server running on that instance, running in the same directory. All it does is tells us the root directory is at /www. I run select PHP, and we have our values returned back. So again, the same script I just ran both on command line, web server. They work interchangeably in this case. Works like a charm. The second piece I'm going to show you here is a simple update, conveniently enough called update.php. Again, we start out by including our database connection. We set an SQL line variable, and what we're doing here is update customer, set city equals question mark, where customer number equals question mark. These are going to be placeholders that will be bound parameters going into the system, or going into the statement. Go ahead and prepare it. We're going to set the variable customer number to 103, so we're looking at the same customer. We're going to change city to Annandale, because I like Annandale. And what we're going to do is we're going to create an array. This is how you create an array in PHP very simply. There's several different ways. Again, PHP likes to give you options. What we're going to do is we're going to wrap it in the array function. So any variables we have in there will be part of an array. So the first element of the array will be city. The second element will be the customer number. So again, the first element in our SQL line is city equals. So city equal question mark will equal the city variable, which is Annandale. The second question mark will equal the second element in the array, customer number, so 103, so where customer number is 103. So we have a variable together, and what we're going to do is on the statement handle, we're going to execute it, passing that array to it. So it'll go through, it'll run, and then just return. I have a real simple returning of error code in case there is one. If there's not an error, there won't be a usable error code, obviously, or you can track that there wasn't. One thing to note here, if you start working with this kind of code, actually two notes. First one is, if you do not give the correct number of array values as you had parameters in your statement, you will get an error. On an older version of the PDO Informix driver, and I have not verified if the new one does it or not, if you give the incorrect number of variables or no variables at all, it can actually segfault. On your Apache web server, the segfault doesn't crash the system, but it may trigger a quick restart of the Apache instance. This is not something that would cause a downtime situation, but it would be something where it crashed the script wherever it was, and you don't want that. The newer driver seems to handle this better, but I do know quite a few people that are still running the older PDO driver, so they may wish to upgrade the PDO Informix driver. Again, the new version came out last month, so if you haven't updated, it's time. The new one seems to be quite a bit more stable. And not that the old one is unstable, but there were a few places like this that would occasionally segfault, and you don't want that. The second note, and this is just coding practices, because I have talked to a number of people that were not aware of this. If you are running code against a public web server or anywhere else that is remotely someone else will be inputting data, always bind every input parameter that you're going to have on an update, a delete, a select, whatever it might be. If you are letting them input data onto your SQL string, always bind it. If you allow them to just put in a variable directly into the string itself, that's when they can start putting in surprisingly creative ways that could corrupt your database, or in other words, delete records, or otherwise do what is called SQL injection, where it's putting SQL where you don't expect it. So just avoid that. Always bind your parameters. It will solve 98% of your potential SQL injection right there. The other 2% is if you have very strange dynamic SQL in a stored procedure, and I know very few people that have gone down that route. I put that in there as a general disclaimer and general warning. I just want to make sure every web developer out there is please bind your parameters going in. So this script will run by itself. Record update, return code 0 because there was no error. And what we're going to do is go back up to our web page, refresh, and customer 103 is now in Annandale. Again, command line, customer 103, Philip Curie, is in Annandale. This is really simple stuff here. However, this is really the building blocks. I've shown you how to do a select. I've shown you how to get data back. I've shown you how to do an update. Certainly same way as you would do an insert or deletion. With those basic blocks, I mean, you can do the same with running a stored procedure. You can access everything in a database at this point. Sky's the limit for what you want to build on top of this. That's the nice thing with this. We're 45 minutes into it, and 5 minutes of that was switching between windows and going through some intro slides, and we now have the foundation for doing whatever we need to against the database on a web page, on a command line, on potentially both. You're ready to go. So I'm gonna step back a little bit and talk about a couple of other elements. Now that we have our system installed, the first one is going to be folks on Windows, and I will apologize in advance for this. There is not a clean way to do this on Windows. I have installed, PHP on Windows does not come with a PDO Informix driver. I'm hoping it will at some point. It does not right now. I think due to some licensing issues. You can build the module the same way we did here on Linux on Windows. I've seen it done. It's not easy, and you usually need some kind of full installer or full compilation suite on Windows. If you have that ability, you're good with building stuff on Windows, great. If you're not, I'm not a Windows guy, but I've had to do this. The couple of ways I recommend, one of which is you can use PDO ODBC and use the Windows ODBC library just like you would with any other Informix application that uses it, and connect that way. Your code will be the same other than the one driver connection line that used ODBC instead of Informix. That may be the easiest. Another way is you can use OAT itself. When you install OAT, it installs a copy of Apache, installs a copy of PHP, and it installs the PDO Informix module. You can use it. You could actually take the Informix module and use it elsewhere. The only problem there is it is linked to the PHP version they use in OAT, which is normally a little out of date. So you might have some compatibility problems where you'll get a version mismatch error trying to start your Apache. You can try it. You could also use your OAT web server PHP install as the basis of for your web server. You certainly can modify it. It's a full copy of Apache on there, so you can modify that however you want. The third option is you can use a pre-built DLL file. I know one of the IUG board members had put one out a few years ago. I don't know if they're still maintaining it or not, but because these things are modules, you can actually, build them, import them, and hand them out to, as you need to. Again, on Windows, most of the time, I just use the ODBC driver. There's slight ODBC overhead, but we're talking a % or two. It's not terribly much. I went through the basic query. I included it in the slides. So again, if you're looking at the slides after the fact, you'll be able to reference it. I mentioned the case statement here where you actually change the attribute. So again, you can change it to lower, upper, or natural, which is whatever it is in the database. I usually personally, I prefer just setting everything as lower so I always know what to expect. Again, it depends on your environment and your coding standards. The second section is the error mode. This is what error mode you will see when there was an error with the driver. The first one is silent. You really don't recommend silent unless you're doing something that you under no circumstances want an error back. Warning, which I believe is the default, will raise an error message if there is one and just output a standard PHP warning. The problem is with the warning situation, if there is an error on the database layer that you want to handle, PHP will not gracefully handle it. If it gets an actual error, it will stop your script at that point. The third option is the error mode exception. What this will do is anytime that PHP, PDO, and Informix driver gets an error, it'll raise an exception in PHP. In PHP, the exception option, if you use a try-catch system, you can properly catch those exceptions and do what you need to with them. You may say that, it can't connect to the database. That's an error we just want to close out the script on. But maybe it can't insert a new row. Maybe that's something we want to handle by sending an email to somebody. Or we want to handle by trying it again in 10 seconds. Or, you handle it however you want to set up the code to handle it. It allows you to properly trap errors, trap warnings, and handle them cleanly. The third one there is stringify fetches. I haven't used this much, but if you're using a lot of blobs, you can define how the blob data is actually returned. There are several other options here for attributes you can set. If you check the documentation, they're there. These are the ones that I've seen used more than anything else, which is why I mentioned them. We set up basic query. We fetch data. Just real quickly, I had fetch object in our example. Fetch row if you want a standard numerical array returned. There's associated if you want an associated array returned. Both if you want both returned in one object. You can fetch as a number if you just want a specific numerical returned. And there's lazy, which will return absolutely everything into a single object. You could use it if you want to. If you really want to find out how everything's formatted, you can use that. I haven't used lazy much, but it's there if you want it. It may be more for some of the MySQL developers. I'm never entirely sure. Lots of different ways to bind here. Because we're running low on time, I'm going to skip through those, but they are on the slides if you wish to read through it. Again, all of this is in the PHP documentation. Error handling, just going to show really quickly because I find this goes hand in hand with the Informix driver, is you use the try catch. You have whatever you would have in your statement block. Normally I wrap any PHP or any database statement inside a try catch block just to be safe, because I never want an unexpected error from, cannot write next page, cannot position row within index, to actually crash out the system. I want it to do something clean, and even if I'm stopping, I want to actually print out an error and normally write an error log. So this will properly catch it and allow you to handle and either proceed or exit. You can actually have logic in your catch statement to see what error was returned and handle it accordingly. The only thing I will recommend here is do not put a SQL statement inside of your catch block. If you have something like catch and then it writes something out to a log table in that, if in your try block it failed because the database is down or there is a lock wait problem or something else, and it goes into a catch and tries to write out a log to the database, and that's the reason it failed in the try and then it fails here, you will have a hard crash on your application. And when I say hard crash, I don't mean Apache will crash and your whole website will be offline, but that the user will get a completely unhelpful error message is thrown up to the screen. And when we have users on our website, we want things to look nice. We want things to look professional. We don't want to have, what looks at them as gobbledygook error messages. We want cleanly formatted and cleanly logged error message. So that's just the one caveat with that. Otherwise, the code works very well. There's no real performance hit on it. There's no reason not to do it, in other words. Error handling, I've got some notes in here if you want to read through it. Couple of links just for reference here. PHP.net is the PHP website. You go get the software there. The one big thing that they have that I highly recommend is their documentation. If you go to php.net/function name, can be any function, it'll immediately pull up a very comprehensive guide to how to use that function, the usage, the history, and then there'll be a huge section underneath of user-submitted comments, notes, and example code to work with. And it'll usually also have associated other useful functions that are attached to that one. So if you aren't sure how to do something, you put in a similar function, it'll tell you how to use it, and maybe some other functions that'll do similar or different jobs as well. The next two are in the Zend, which they actually do a lot for the back. They're a company. They'll give you PHP support if you want to buy it. They also provide a lot of the code for the PHP system itself, and they have their own set of framework that you can use for the PHP system that tends to be very popular. Next one is IAG.org open source. It's IAG's commitment to the open source community. So there's a fair amount of things that go on there. At one point, I believe the Windows DLL driver was on there. I do not know if it currently is or not. Next one is the PECL links to Informix and the IBM drivers. So you can go on there, download the download links on the first page. The one note with that is if you can't remember what this is, Google, PDO, Informix, it'll be the first link on Google. Last one is Open Admin Tool. If you have not used OAT before, with Informix, fantastic tool. You really need to be running version 11 to get the most out of it. The later versions, you'll get more functionality, but it's free for use. Can be deployed on Windows or Linux, and I believe they even have VMware images with it already set up. It's a great way to graphically monitor your Informix instance. It's all written in PHP with the PDO driver, with the exception of there is some Flash embedded into it as well. But it's all there. You can go, it's all PHP. If you really want to go see what they put together, the source code's included, or is what you're running. It's there if you need it, and the drivers are included. So we're going to pull up questions at this point. Let me.
Well, I take everybody off of mute, so anybody who has a question can ask it directly, Tom.
Okay, that sounds good. Lester, in case I didn't come through, Lester will be taking everyone off mute, so I'll take any questions at this point. There's the chat button.
Hey, hello?
Hello.
This is Amy Grosh from BLM.
Hi, Lester, we're going to need to mute somebody because somebody has background noise through. Go ahead, Amy.
Yes, I'm interested in the other 2% where the binding solves most of your problems on executing the SQL.
Okay.
I'm trying to do a stored procedure, and we are having trouble. And I'm going to try the binding, but are there other specific things that you've run into with stored procedures?
No, honestly, I have had very good luck working with stored procedure and the PDO Informix library. The only time that, and it's not that it won't work, Jonathan Leffler, if you're familiar with him, he's like the Informix security guru. He told me specifically that this one little gotcha, bound parameters will completely eliminate the ability to do SQL injection because you can't, break a string in a argument to, end it and then start saying you're not expecting. The one place that this is not the case is if you're using dynamic SQL, which is a new feature, I think in 11.1 or 11.5, inside of stored procedures. I know very few people that have even begun to use it. In that case, you could actually have a problem with, where somebody could put in something you're not expecting. And in that case, it's just the best advice I have is either whitelist what data you're expecting to come through. If you're expecting a number, if it's not a number, don't accept it, or have a list of possible values that you can take. And if it's none of those, then just either ignore it or return an error. But yeah, the only time that it is a security problem is if you're using dynamic SQL where the stored procedure actually builds the SQL inside of it.
Okay.
But in terms of the driver itself, I have not run into any problems with actually executing stored procedures from PHP.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome. The next question actually I got on privately was, can the PDO Informix be used with Informix SE? Yes, it can. I have not done it. It can be made to work with it. I know someone I've talked to a number of times. I just don't know if I'm supposed to use his name on here or not. And it is not officially supported, but it can be made to work.
You have to get SE working with the network first. If you can connect to Informix SE remotely through the network daemon, then you can probably get it to work with PHP.
Thank you, Lester, for the fill-in on that. I have not tried to do it with SE, but I do know those who have. So other questions? Does anyone have any other questions, either message or speak up on the phone? Okay, I'm going to be turning this back over to Lester. He's got a couple of announcements and some really interesting information about some upcoming stuff. Hold on just a moment.
Thank you, Tom. Really appreciate it. And this is a great webcast. What I'd like to do is I just put up on our webpage at Advanced DataTools the next webcast, which will be March 12th by Art Cagle on Informix performance tuning. He did several of these last year that were very well attended, and sort of an exciting opportunity to to learn a bit more about how we do Informix performance tuning here. As Tom mentioned earlier, in about 2 days, we'll have a replay of this webcast online, and really appreciate everybody attending, and look forward to seeing you on the next webcast. And if you have any questions, please email Tom or myself, and we'll be glad to try and help you out. Thank you all, and have a good rest of the day and a good weekend.
Thank you, Lester.